You're listening to People, Places, Planet, the official podcast of the Environmental Law Institute, a nonpartisan, nonprofit research and education institute making law work for people, places, and the planet. If you enjoy the podcast and want to support our work, consider donating at eli.org/donate.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of People, Places, Planet. I'm your host, Sebastian Duque Rios, and our episode today is going to center on our National Wetland Awardees. Since 1989, ELI has emphasized the importance of wetlands through our National Wetlands Awards program. The program's core mission is to call attention to the value of wetlands and celebrate the important work being done by individuals to protect these vital resources. Over the years, we have given awards to 225 individuals, communities, and agencies. This year, we are excited to announce our 3 awardees, Simone Maloz, Wyatt Penfold, and Mike Rolband, who are joining us for today's episode. This episode will be split into 3 individual segments with each awardee. Joining us first is Simone Maloz. Simone Maloz is this year's winner for promoting wetland education and awareness. She is the campaign director for Restore the Mississippi River Delta, where she leads advocacy and outreach for large-scale coastal restoration in Louisiana. With over 2 decades of experience, she has worked across policy, communications, and coalition building to protect one of America's most threatened wetland ecosystems. A seasoned podcaster and coastal leader, Simone is known for translating policy into public action. She also serves on several state advisory bodies guiding Louisiana's coastal future. Welcome to the podcast, Simone.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Simone, can you start by telling us what is the role and significance of wetlands in Louisiana and broadly across the country?
Sure. So in some ways, wetlands in Louisiana is probably no different than any other place in America. Of course, it has ecological value. It has economic value. And here in South Louisiana, it actually has cultural value. So it provides extremely important hurricane protection for our coastal communities. It is the protection to our levee protection, if you will. But it's also the place where our sportsman's paradise is born. And so it's the nursery, it is the habitat, it is the important space for all those important creatures and living things here in Louisiana. And then so much of Louisiana's culture and frankly, a lot of our economy is really tied to the natural resources that Louisiana has. And our wetlands are no different. And so we really count those wetlands as something that's significant to all 3 of those areas: the economy, the ecology, and the cultural resources.
Wetlands definitely do play a very important cultural role in Louisiana and also where I'm from, Florida. They're very key to the identity that we built as states. Could you tell us a little more about your current work at Restore the Mississippi River Delta?
Sure. I am the campaign director at Restore the Mississippi River Delta, and we are a campaign coalition, which means that several different organizations come together and contribute resources and capacity. And we have one focus, and that is the restoration of Louisiana's Delta. And so what that means is that we have staff with policy expertise that includes science, policy. We have communication experts. We have a diverse outreach and engagement crew that works on our team, and several different organizations contribute to that. There are 3 international organizations with the Environmental Defense Fund, National Wildlife Federation, and National Audubon Society that pair up with a Louisiana-based organization called Pontchartrain Conservancy. That group makes up the coalition. And so I am the common denominator between all of that work so that we can work on those goals that have to do with restoring the Mississippi River Delta.
Thank you, Simone. Great to hear a little bit more about the coalition that you work with. And you personally have led some major restoration campaigns and hosted podcast episodes. What role does storytelling play in building support for restoration work?
Yeah, that is such a great question about storytelling. It's finally putting a name to something I've probably done my entire life, deeply rooted in my personality. For 20 years, I've worked in coastal Louisiana, working on restoration projects in these areas. In 2005, I started with a regional advocacy group, a coastal group based in Louisiana. And while I started in January of 2005, We all know what happened in August of 2005 with Hurricane Katrina. And this year will be the 20th year of that anniversary of that landfall. But just a month later, people often forget there was another devastating hurricane here called Hurricane Rita. So we experienced back to back devastation from one side of the state to the other. And that really fundamentally changed Louisiana and changed the way that we thought about restoration and protection. And I happened to be at a place in my career and I was just learning the ropes. And all the rules of the games changed. And I was there for the development of this new coastal authority, the development of a new comprehensive coastal master plan that said, hey, we need to plan better for our future here in coastal Louisiana. And all of this ties back to storytelling because you have to be able to talk about the challenges that we face here in coastal Louisiana, but you also have to be able to frame up what opportunities we have. I think that's a large part of my personality is I'm probably pretty optimistic by nature. So I never just wanted to talk about the bad things. I wanted to talk about the things that we were doing, the changes that we were putting in place, and more importantly, these really big projects that we were going to put online that were going to reduce risk in coastal communities. That is the story that I wanted to tell.
You're kind of identifying a broader question that comes up in environmental communication a lot, right? Whether it's sea level rise or wildfires, hurricanes, there's a lot of alarmism and a lot of alarmist language that is used. And it is important to identify all the dangers and risks, but there is also a lot of potential and value in framing our stories in a way that inspires people and inspires action and change.
Yeah, with the anniversaries of Katrina and Rita and even the oil spill, we had some really tough lessons that we learned. And we need to be able to tell that story to other people so that they can know how we got through it or what we would have changed about it. So we realized that Louisiana story in so many ways, while we think we are very unique and in a lot of ways what is happening to us is unique, but there are some things that we can export that knowledge to other people facing really difficult climate futures as well, sea level rise and other coastal communities and hurricanes and extreme weather. And how do you recover from one storm when you haven't recovered after another? And so we think there's a lot of information to share there as well.
That's a good way to frame storytelling, understanding that it should not just focus on what was lost, but could also focus on what can be done and how we communicate that to others. Simone, it would be wonderful if we could hear a little more in depth on an example from a restoration project or campaign that you've worked on.
Yeah, so we have been very fortunate to be involved in several different levels of a campaign. From here in Louisiana, we have parishes, a smaller parish level project to implementing multi-million dollar, upwards of billion-dollar projects. It is easier to go into communities earlier and to start those conversations as soon as you can. Don't just go in there to check a box. We want folks to be engaged from the very beginning so that they understand their risk and they understand why this project's being implemented to help reduce their risk. So I will say, as I was talking about earlier, the coastal master plan that we developed after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, we've had several iterations of that, which it's required by law to be updated. It was every 5, and now it's every 6 years. So we have this ongoing mandatory process where we use this science-based plan to guide our decisions, but the people are an essential component of that plan. As the nonprofit community and as our coalition, we want to help bridge that gap, to help bring the science-based plan to the people of the communities it intends to protect and restore. This idea of having a continuous conversation with the communities has been really important because it's not just, hey, I just need you for this one thing. It is part of an ongoing conversation, but that requires a big commitment, a lot of capacity, a lot of resources, and groups just like ours to be that common denominator to keep that conversation going.
Yeah. And you mentioned that wetlands in Louisiana are a big cultural thing too, right? So on the first level, I'm wondering, has that translated into a good amount of engagement with this kind of work from the community? Are they willing to be engaged? And are they excited about working on this? And then has that facilitated being able to translate the science and the policy to the community?
Yeah, that is a great question. So here in coastal Louisiana, people were experiencing this change. I grew up, I had a bayou in my front yard. I have friends that had camps that they would spend all weekend. They knew how to drive a boat before they knew how to drive a car. I mean, that was part of the way that I and so many others grew up here. And so people understood and still understand the loss that's happening here. This idea that our wetlands and our coast here was something that was not headed in the right direction. Maybe they didn't always know what to name it or what the exact problem is, but in so many ways they did. They knew because we were cut off from the river or because there's no sediment, there's no more freshwater connection, because salt water was encroaching from the Gulf. They knew these things, and maybe they just didn't know the scientific, technical way of saying it. But so many people in Louisiana, because they were users of the wetlands, they understood what loss was happening. They also have ideas on potentially how to fix it. And so that's really what we want to tap into, that important knowledge of folks that are living and working and playing in these coastal communities that are experiencing this loss. And then we do apply academics to it and modeling. We kind of plus up a lot of what they're saying or what they thought maybe are solutions. And so, really important to the work that we do is communicating that in both ways, on both sides of the street, being able to communicate what challenges they're facing in coastal communities, what opportunities they see to some of the academics and the technical folks that are developing these plans and making sure it makes sense. Sometimes folks in communities think like, oh, maybe you could just change this one thing and that would help this area. But then you have to say, no, then that affects this and this and this. But sometimes it is a very simple solution that they see on the ground there. One of the components of the coastal master plan development that our state has gotten pretty good about is asking folks for those project ideas. They don't just go to engineering firms or academics, they go to coastal communities. And we are proud to be part of those conversations and be both facilitators and listening on both sides of that.
Yeah, that's a really great aspect of the master plan that it's incorporated to go to the communities and seek ideas from them.
It is not something that we can ever let up on. It is something that we will always have to constantly strive to do better or to do more. But that is something that's at the forefront of our minds of, are there people that we are not reaching? Are there communities that are not being heard? And what can we do to help bridge that gap between the state or the federal work and what's really happening on the ground in these coastal communities? Sometimes that means pushing for increased access or pushing for translation of certain documents so that folks understand. Sometimes it means us hosting a community meeting in a place or two where the state couldn't be there. And I am proud to say that previous partners and the state and federal government have followed that lead, and they have done a lot better job of increasing transparency and access. And we hope that continues.
It's really encouraging to hear the work that you all are doing to make this process as equitable and engaging for communities as possible. And it also highlights your work at the state and regional level. So you've been deeply involved in shaping coastal policy at both the state and regional level. And we'd love to know, what are some of the most impactful policy developments that you've worked on, and how have they advanced wetland restoration efforts in Louisiana?
That's another great question because it can't just simply want all of these things and not know how to pay for it. We have a coastal master plan that is 50 years and $50 billion. And frankly, it could be a lot more than that. But that was part of the process to prioritize how we spend our dollars with both short term projects and long term projects. And so we have been very successful in leveraging the dollars that we have gotten here in Louisiana, that we have received. And so after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2007, we were able to get a dedicated fund from the federal government. And we have been able to show what we've invested that money in. And then, of course, Deepwater Horizon had billions of dollars of fines and penalties associated with that. So we have been able to show our track record of how we've invested those dollars, how we've reduced risk, how we've made the coastal communities safer or the wetlands more resilient. And luckily, we've been able to put our money where our mouth is and show where that's been. But the series of policy decisions made that possible, especially when it came to dedicating those dollars. We, as a state, passed a constitutional amendment. So, a vote of the entire state of Louisiana that had to say, hey, we want this money to go into this protected coastal trust fund. And then those assurances obviously helped us when we did get those fines and penalties to say, we will not spend this money on something other than what we said in the coastal trust fund. Those series of policy decisions allowed people to gain trust in investing their dollars in coastal Louisiana.
I think in this era where we're seeing a lot of money being pulled back and taken away, it's good to have a steady funding base, especially at the state level, that you can rely on and that can keep people who are interested in investing in coastal Louisiana wetlands assured that their money is going to go into good use, right?
Yeah, it's a constant conversation though, because 20 years have seen a lot of people come and go, especially elected officials. And so, just like we start many of our conversations and presentations talking about losing that football field of land every 100 minutes, reminding folks the challenge that we face, we also have to remind them that we have been good stewards of this money. We have invested it wisely. We have used it for balance, restoration, and protection. And that is something that we simply cannot take our foot off the gas on. It's something that has created a successful coastal program here, and it is not something that we can take for granted.
Thank you, Simone. And my next question is, if you could get every American to understand one thing about wetlands, what would it be?
What a good question. I think that, I think if I had one thing to convey to folks, it's probably along the same lines of that theme of not taking them for granted. It is such an important feature, not just for Louisiana, but for so many places because of that ecology, because of that economy, because of that cultural resource. It's not something that we should take for granted and then just assume it's always healthy and always will be there.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Simone. And thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So next up on the podcast, we have Mike Rolband. Mike Rolband is this year's winner for Wetland Leadership in the Public Sector. He is the director of the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and a nationally recognized expert in wetland regulation and restoration. He founded and led a multidisciplinary environmental firm, helped shape Virginia's wetland laws, and has served on numerous advisory boards. Mike has also championed science-based approaches to stormwater management and founded a nonprofit to fund applied ecological research. His career bridges public and private sectors in advancing wetland conservation and environmental innovation. Welcome to the episode, Mike.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here today.
It's a pleasure to have you, Mike. To get started, you bring many years of experience in both the private and public sectors to your role in Virginia's Department of Environmental Quality. So how has that helped shape the way that you lead Virginia's Department of Environmental Quality?
I think the number one takeaway that I've had from working in both areas is the realization that transparency and open communications can lead to many, many solutions. Accountability has also been a huge aspect in all our private sector work. And what I learned kind of late in my life is that transparency is not always as common as one might think in the public sector. I used to think that the public sector was totally transparent. What I realize now is they're not. But what I've done at DEQ is bring all three things together. And having that, it's like supercharged the organization. The combination has led to unbelievable increases in performance, just simply bringing together transparency, communication, and accountability.
That's a great way to look at the way that we should be leading our state agencies. Now, moving on a little bit to your work on wetlands, you've played a role in crafting Virginia's wetland and stormwater regulations. How have those laws evolved and where is there still work to do?
That's a great question. So I'll maybe bifurcate and just talk about wetlands first and stormwater second. So in terms of wetlands in Virginia, I was very lucky to be at the right place at the right time. So back in 2000, I actually co-wrote the law with Roy Hoagland and our patron, Preston Bryant. The reason we wrote a law in Virginia was because we were losing lots of wetlands from Tulloch ditching, which was a result of a lawsuit against Colonel Tulloch in North Carolina. And then the Fourth Circuit Court's Wilson decision that removed federal jurisdiction over isolated wetlands. So what we did is work together, the home builders, the commercial builders, and the Bay Foundation, to develop a new law where Virginia would regulate all wetlands, including isolated wetlands and all activities in those areas. In exchange for that, we said that the business community would deserve stability and predictability. And what we did is created a permit system to go along with this so that the business world and the public sector world that builds things like transportation improvements, fire stations, schools, can all depend on this process. I think the big thing is that we created a system of areas that we regulate and how we regulate in a manner that's been stable for over 25 years. While at the same time, the federal level, those decisions have been vacillating back and forth like a pendulum. We gave the consistency to everybody, to the environmental groups as well as the business groups. Now, we've been working on some changes and some improvements the last 3 years since I've been at DEQ. One thing we've added is a training and certification program. Virginia is one of the few states that already regulate or certify wetland delineators. And we've added a stream course because that didn't count streams. So how do you identify streams? Are they an intermittent, ephemeral, or perennial? If you have both, then you become a VSWD. And if you have those certifications, DEQ promises a 30-day time turnaround in giving you a delineation from the state, a state surface waters determination. So instead of waiting for the Corps for many months or longer sometimes, you can get that decision right away. And the key to that is once you know what the government is going to regulate, then you can apply more realistically what the appropriate permit decision is. When you don't have that decision of where the boundaries are, it's hard for people to avoid and minimize impacts because they don't know what's regulated. The other thing we've done is we created an MOA with the Army Corps because mitigation has been delaying permits throughout the Commonwealth for decades. It was taking on the average 1,300 days to get a mitigation bank approved. So we created an MOA with the Corps and we have cut that down to under 450 days. So it's a huge improvement. And that goes into our PEEP system, which is our online system that every permit we touch, we track it. We have a schedule and everyone's notified by email if they're coming close to their due date a week in advance. So everyone involved can publicly see this online so that we all know where it is. And that's sped up this Army Corps state process of mitigation dramatically. The last thing we've been doing in wetlands is we're trying to create an in lieu fee program. So we have shortages of mitigation and the current providers can't always keep up with it. So we're looking at two things to do. One is creating an in lieu fee program. We're in with the Corps right now to get that approved. So if you can't buy mitigation credits, they are not available. If the Nature Conservancy's trust fund is not available, then instead of permitted responsibility, you have the choice. You could go to our fund. It'll cost more money, but it'll be a backstop. The other part of that is we're creating a trading platform. So the biggest problem is that while mitigation banking was supposed to be a private free market solution to a regulatory requirement, we don't have a true free market in terms of we don't know what price is, we don't know what the supply is, what the demand is. It's not transparent. So we're trying to create basically a commodity trading platform. We're calling it SWAN for Stream and Wetland and Nutrient Mitigation Credit Trading Platform. And so the goal by the end of the year to have it finally live where you could get timely, up-to-date information on all these factors and actually have a free market. And that should stimulate more private sector solutions. Now, switching topics to stormwater, what we've been working with is a stormwater program that has all these different handbooks and manuals. And then we have all sorts of guidance documents. When we printed them all out and made a pile, it was 23 inches tall. There was a separate law for erosion control and a separate law for stormwater management, and they overlap. So what we've done is, number one, we've consolidated those two regulations. And so there's one integrated regulation for erosion control and stormwater management. We've created a new stormwater handbook that's online so it can be very easily searchable and kept up to date. And it uses the best of what we could find available. And so we have a stakeholders advisory group that meets periodically that reviews comments. People can comment online when they're using it and they see something wrong. So the idea is to have a living document that's kept up to date, that has the best technology, engineering, and science. So everyone's on the same page. The other thing, again, is training. We've reinvigorated, just like in wetlands training, we've reinvigorated the stormwater training. And we've established a streamlined review process to encourage people to take these classes and become certified. We're finding that speeds things up a lot. There are some penalties. 3 strikes, you're out. You've got to take the classes again and take the test again. Some people don't like it, but what we want are people that know what they're doing and do the right job the first time. And then everything can go better and smoother and faster. But first you had to have the manual, which we did. It went into effect a year ago, July 1st. We had a 1-year transition period that just ended. And now you have to use that new method for everything.
Mike, this is some great work that Virginia's been up to, and it's really awesome to hear about all the work that you all have been doing relating to permit streamlining. That's something that state agencies are looking at, not only in wetlands, right, but across all sorts of environmental issues in their states.
What we've done in that area, we created something called the PEEB system, and it's Permit Evaluation Enhancement Platform program. And so it's basically just a simple Gantt chart scheduling system. So we have 11 major permit programs and 124 major permit types. We regulate air, land, and water. So there's a lot of things that we do. And every permit we touch has a schedule. It's published on our website, but then when you submit something, it gets you the schedule, and then we start tracking who has it against that schedule. So everybody knows what's going on and when they're off schedule or on schedule and where it's gone. And what we found is that public transparency is just amazing. It's transparent, it's public, so it communicates to anybody. And it's eliminated an amazing number of complaints. We spent a few months first tracking our history of how long it took to get a permit. And our weighted average is 339 days. We cut it by 2/3. Didn't change any rules. But now you know who has it and when they had it. And most of the delays are with certain other agencies or the applicants themselves. So that's another reason why we're trying to improve the training programs. We've done the same thing with enforcement. And I think that's key. So all we do is put all the enforcement public on our website, and it's amazing. We have cut the time it takes to enforce a violation by over 2/3. People don't break the rules when everyone else knows about it. Let's say that. And other states are talking to us and trying to emulate us. It's really cool.
Thank you, Mike. That's a really powerful example of how transparency and accountability can help to drive efficiency and trust in government processes like permitting. And I would also take a moment to just encourage our listeners, if they haven't done so already, to listen to an episode on in lieu fee programs and mitigation banking that we did with the Director of Wetland and Stream Mitigation for the Nature Conservancy in Virginia, Karen Johnson. That episode really helps to highlight some of the issues that we're talking about. And moving on to the next question, Mike, what are some of the biggest opportunities or challenges in managing wetlands through regulation in Virginia?
Well, you got to look at how can we improve restoration. And I think number one, we're trying to change some things to encourage voluntary restoration of streams and wetlands versus just regulating people that are doing good things. So that's been a complaint or an issue TNC and I have talked about, where they're getting government money or private sector money to do good things and restore streams and wetlands. Yet our agency and other agencies can stand in the way with all these regulatory barriers. We have to work on that. The other big challenge, of course, is trying to get more supply on the market to eliminate the shortages and the price volatilities. And that's what makes people not want to protect wetlands. If it's difficult to get a permit is one thing, but if it's even more difficult to get mitigation approved, it makes them less likely to want to protect these areas. And what we need to do is make it easy to restore areas and to provide compensation for them so that we can get people to want to protect all these wetlands. I think the last challenge is just reacting to the changes in the Corps' jurisdiction. We don't know what's going to happen. The good news in Virginia is that we, for 25 years, directly in writing, protect all wetlands, including isolated wetlands and all activities in those. What the federal government does or does not do is not that material because we're actually doing the protection. So while it's frustrating in some other states, I think in Virginia, we're sitting pretty darn well. And I will say that indirectly, we've protected all these surface waters and groundwater back from 1968. But in 2000, we clarified that it included wetlands because not everyone agreed with that interpretation.
Those are definitely some very important challenges that I think a lot of departments across the country are facing right now. And a lot of states, especially those who might not have the same protections as Virginia, are kind of questioning what their next move should be. So thank you for bringing that perspective. Next, we wanted to ask, how has your background in applied research and engineering, both through your work at DEQ and your nonprofit, shaped your approach to using science and data to drive wetland restoration and mitigation efforts in Virginia?
So I have a relatively simple answer then. I think my experience and background in dealing with these, what seem to be very complex problems, it's been by simply breaking them into small pieces that you can understand and tackle, develop a schedule for, and track progress. That's been the key in everything I've done in my whole career. So I think you just got to break it up so you don't get overwhelmed in the pieces that you can comprehend.
Yeah, breaking it up into smaller and more digestible chunks for everybody, whether it's regarding data or science, that's a really good perspective to bring not just into wetlands, but into any sort of project, right? And as someone who's had this wonderful experience leading DEQ in Virginia, what are some levers that other state agencies could utilize to protect and restore wetlands in the face of climate and development pressures? Any innovations you think states should be paying attention to?
Well, that's an interesting question. So climate changes and development pressures are a little bit different. Okay. So from the development pressure, I think it's much easier to deal with because the key is we've got to have good mitigation for unavoidable impacts. And we have to have a permit system that rewards people for following that process and developing good mitigation. The climate change area is slightly different. I think there's a couple different aspects to it. Number one are buffers. In Virginia, we have what's called the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. That requires a 100-foot buffer between any wetland that's contiguous and connected by surface flow to a perennial stream. It's not everything, okay, but it's a huge area. And that buffer system is really helpful. For example, sea level rises and the tidal areas rise, wetlands will move and migrate. It gives you room for that migration. I think the other aspect of it is in mitigation in terms of for years, we have been stuck on the coordinate classifications of wetland types for mitigation. And, I've seen permits where you have to have like 12,422.2 feet of shrub scrub wetland and X thousand square feet of PFO, forested wetland. Number one, nature isn't that precise. We can't precisely design wetland restoration areas to be that exact. And climates change and other things like beavers come in. And to me, one of the saddest things is having to trap and kill beavers to meet regulatory requirement of having so many tree stems per acre. I think we have to become more flexible in how we're doing mitigation to handle those climate pressures. I will say outside of the Chesapeake Bay area, we do in our wetland permit program with the Army Corps recommend a minimum 25-foot buffers in streams and wetlands. So it's not always done, but having those buffers to give a little flexibility will allow some resiliency for climate pressures. One other thing I should mention on development pressures is that plans do change, okay? But we always know that surface runoff increases with increased development. One failure I've seen a lot in mitigation and restoration projects, they're not designing the aquatic system to account for that future development activity. I think that's something that we really have to do because if we're going to have a design that's going to handle the resiliency, future climate changes, it's much easier to do that if you've already designed it to handle the future potential changes of the development in that watershed.
Well, Mike, I would love to go down a rabbit hole about the beavers because I think it's so interesting to think about the consequences that well-intended policies can have, but we're out of time. So I want to thank you for joining us today, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
So next up, we have Wyatt Penfold. Wyatt is this year's winner for Landowner Stewardship, a fourth-generation farmer in Idaho's Teton Valley and the chair of the Teton Basin Water Users Association. He has led collaborative efforts between farmers, conservationists, and local leaders to restore wetlands and address groundwater decline. Through innovative practices like incentivized incidental recharge and regenerative agriculture, Wyatt is proving that conservation and agriculture can thrive together. His own farm serves as a model for sustainable water and land management. Wyatt, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be with you. We look forward to sharing some of the good things that we've been doing here in Teton Valley, Idaho.
I'm excited to hear all about them. So with that, why don't we get started? Can you tell us a little bit more about the Teton Basin Water Users Association? Why was it founded and what is it achieving?
So the Teton Basin Water Users Association was founded on a dream of about 3 or 4 of us. We could see that water law was changing in Idaho, and the way that our predecessors, our ancestors, my grandpa, all those that actually started the water in our valley, the leadership was changing. Things were becoming more done by lawyers instead of, in our opinion, common sense people. We are a tributary basin to everything in the lower Snake River. And so we have the ability to hold water and store it up here by using the natural basin to capture that water. What we're trying to achieve is we're trying to protect the water in our valley and keep it so that the farmers within the valley can continue using the water as well as the benefits that come from the farmers using the water. so we worked with our local Farm Bureau office, the Soil Water Conservation, the local land trust, as well as some environmental groups, the Friends of the Teton River and the Henry Spork Foundation, which were all concerned about water and how it works in the valley and all those kind of things. We're just kind of brainstorming back and forth. And so we started with a loose organization, trying to figure out where we would see water moving to in the future. We just figured we better form an organization so that we can meet head on, or maybe even get to the end of the road before these type of things that we saw coming down happen to us. If we didn't have the farmers here in the valley, our river, which gets 30,000 people a year recreating, all those opportunities would dry up. Plus, we'd lose a lot of our wetlands, and actually our downstream water users wouldn't have enough water later in the season when they need it if we discontinue some of the practices we're doing up here in the basin. And some of the main things we're trying to achieve is our aquifers tables drop just like everybody else in the West. We're drying up wetlands, and we saw a lot of that happening because everybody had moved to high efficiency irrigation. And so we weren't replenishing that aquifer early in the spring when it needs to be replenished. So this is our 6th year of data where we can see that we're actually achieving more sustained water flow and water levels as it leaves the valley out of the Teton River.
So after 6 years of effort, you guys are starting to see some real results. You also mentioned the partnerships that have formed along the way, not just with other farmers, but with conservation groups too. What has helped bridge the gap between farmers and conservationists in your community?
I think the main thing that really brought us together was our common goal on saving the water in Teton Valley. Because as you look at what all of our downstream users are doing, they have a lot more money and lawyers and all that kind of stuff than we have up here. And so the only way we figured that we could accomplish all of our goals in protecting the water so the farmers can continue to use it, so we can get crops, as well as make it so that the people who are protecting fish or the recreators, so we could protect those interests as well, is to come together with a common goal. And the good thing from my point of view of bringing everybody together is we all have different people that we can access, whether it be funding or knowledge. We were actually able to leverage that community association that we had, where each group was working together. It was a really novel idea when we'd approach grant writers or people to donate a little money to help us. They were like, holy cow, you've got the farmers and the environmentalists and the fish people and the recreators. Everybody's all in the same boat. That makes it so much easier to be able to give to those common goals that we're all having. We decided our best method to accomplish the goals was to incentivize an incidental recharge program. So we all knew back 60, 70 years ago, before high efficiency irrigation, so before pivots or wheel lines or even hand lines, everybody up here was flood irrigating their land. So we were pulling all the water out of the creeks. We were dispersing it across all the acres in the valley. The river was actually flowing longer at higher rates. We knew that was the case, but there wasn't any hard data to prove that was the case, because nowadays the lawyers, they don't care what hearsay says, they need solid evidence. So that was one of our first things we decided was we need to get some money in. We need to be able to pay for some monitoring our canal flows and monitoring what the rivers does. So we pulled up a whole bunch of old information. We actually got Rolband, who's one of the top water scientists in the area with the Henry Spork Foundation. He actually came up, he built a whole bunch of models for us and gave us some target rates on what we needed to do with this incidental recharge so that we could start to see it affect the Teton River and its flow. And so over the last 5 years, we've been slowly achieving more and more acre feet of water put into the ground in incidental recharge. So everything we're doing is within our water rights to do. We start when our water rights come on. We're flood irrigating. whatever pieces of ground we can flood irrigate. We've opened up all our old stream canals to disperse that water over greater areas, get it to those pastures and grasslands. And with the models that we started seeing, we found that it takes about 3 months for the flow to get to the end of the valley, where we're monitoring the river flow and seeing how what we're doing is affecting it. And our ultimate goal is 30,000 acre feet recharged to really see that major impact for our downstream users. We're about 10,000 acre feet off of that goal right now, but I think we'll be pretty dang close to it this year. And the most important thing is we actually have the data to show that if we continue to do our practices up here, and as well as get our incidental recharge program going in a stronger rate, it's actually helping all of our downstream users by storing water longer for them. Plus, the added benefits of it all are the Teton River's temperatures actually get lowered because we're cooling that water off as it goes through the ground, which keeps the river cooler. The fish flows better. Then we're also aiding some of our native cutthroat trout populations. So major benefits everywhere. Some of the main things that we've done to make it so the farmers want to help all this stuff was incentives. So we were able to secure some grants to get some money. So we got a pot of money, and then we just dispersed that out between all of our different canal companies on their participation level and how many acre feet of water they were actually able to incidentally recharge. So we had monitoring stations put up down each one of the spots where we were flood irrigating. We were able to monitor that, and then we just monetized those incentives. We had a pot of, say, $30,000, and if you did 10% of the water, then you got 10% of the money. So we were able to incentivize each canal company, plus they were able to use that money. The next year, they were able to open up more of the old canals and basically make the whole process more efficient. We even had people buy gated pipe just so that they could flood irrigate their land even easier with some of the incentives. So far, it's been a win-win for everybody, but now we've got a whole nother set of changes coming to water laws in Idaho and all that. So we're trying to meet all this head on with these things that we've been doing.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear kind of how diverse the beneficial impact is, not only helping downstream farmers, but also helping wildlife and giving all sorts of environmental benefits to the area. And so we kind of touched there on the role of financial incentives. Your farm is seen as a model in the region, and we're curious to know a little bit more about what specific practices you've implemented or you're looking to implement, and what kind of impact have you seen in your farm?
So on our farm, we've always practiced a little more in line with the regenerative agricultural model. I go back to my grandfather. We've always grown seed potatoes for everybody, and then we've grown grain crops. And then he started doing an Austrian winter pea crop on our farm. And so we take those Austrian winter peas, we plant them in the fall, and mid-July, we'll usually just till those back under for a green manure crop. So that adds nitrogen in the soil. It has all the organic matter. And then as we went through the years, probably 7, 8 years ago, we actually did a project with Nature Conservatory where we did some no-till trials. And regenerative agriculture has to be region specific. We've got such a short growing season up here. Our environmental factors are all different, all those kind of things. So our goal was to try to figure out what's best on the regenerative side to be more sustainable, to have better soil structure so the water goes into the ground better. And after the few years of doing this, we actually did a full cycle, so I think it was 4 years. After going through all that, we found that just going back to what Grandpa was doing was actually just as beneficial as some of the new no-till cover crop. So we're always trying to implement and do new things. But I think a lot of what we've learned is that if we use modern technology when things get short, but go back to some of those old practices, we're actually better off. All the old timers knew you got to spread the water out. You got to flood irrigate some. And then when the water starts to get tight, then you go to using the new technologies to be more efficient in that water use when you don't have as much water. And so that's what we're trying to do up here around where we farm. Use old practices with new technology to make everything the most efficient so that we can provide both the best crops for our customers as well as protect all of our natural resources for the next generations that are coming.
That's a really valuable perspective, too. The importance of regional knowledge that is oftentimes passed down over generations is oftentimes understated. And it's from this regional knowledge that some of the most valuable practices emerge when it comes to land stewardship.
It's amazing. Right now, we think, oh, those guys, they had different practices. They weren't producing as much, all those kind of things. But if you look back and learn from their lessons, they actually, in my opinion, were more in tune with all the little aspects of what Mother Nature was telling them to do.
Yeah, I've always been personally very interested in that aspect of farming. My family's from Colombia, and I've always found it really interesting how coffee in particular is very hard to grow in any way other than artisanally. Like, it's hard to grow in mass production. So it's always been really interesting to me seeing the really unique methodology that each region has developed. And I wanted to circle back on something. Earlier, you mentioned that there's going to be, or there might be, some changes to Idaho's water laws. And I just wanted to hear more about how the association is planning ahead to these potential changes.
So, a few of the potential changes that are coming in Idaho water laws right now in Teton Valley, all of our well users, so all of our deep well that used for irrigation and municipal use, are not regulated under Idaho law. They've just been able to run free because we've had enough water. But with the changes that have been happening with the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer settlement agreements, the state is now looking at whether you're a pumper or a surface water irrigator, it's all the same water. Before, pumpers were off on their own, their water level never ran out. They could just pump and most of it goes back in the ground. But that's one of the major changes. And especially in Idaho, they started with the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer, but now they're moving out into all the tributary basins. So we're going to have to regulate every drop of water that comes out of the valley, whether you're a groundwater user or a surface water user. The state's looking to track every little bit of what water is being used and is it being used to its most beneficial use. So it's a whole different paradigm switch than what my ancestors were dealing with, because it used to be you used it, it went down, the next guy used it. But we're having to look at it in a whole different light now as a whole conjunctive management issue across all the different aspects of water use. And with that coming down the pipe, I think the Teton Basin Water Users Association has been in the forefront of that, because that's why we started tracking all of our incidental recharge, working with the state to try to get incentives programs so that we could get all these numbers together and have the ability to document and prove that our old 100 years ago attitude of flood irrigate when you got the water and then go more efficient when you don't have the water actually is a benefit for everybody. And our program is the most sustainable way to achieve goals from municipalities to fish to recreators and farmers. And that's what we're trying to get documented and actually get done for our area, as well as the downstream users that have higher priority dates than we do.
It's great to see how much thought you all have put into bringing together data as well as more traditional forms of knowledge, because you're absolutely right. We live in a data-driven world, and even though there is so much to learn from traditional forms of knowledge, that is why collaborations like these are so important, because you're bringing together the traditional knowledge but also the people who can help you make those spreadsheets, make those calculations, and all that will then allow you or enable you to acquire funding and other forms of formal organizational support.
That's what we found. Just pulling in the Friends of Teton River and the Henry's Board made it so that we had access to all those people that can do it. Because as farmers, we got enough to do. But those groups, they get paid for running the numbers and showing why we need to protect it. So it's the benefit for everybody to work together.
Well, great talking with you, Wyatt. Thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure having you today.
Thank you. And I appreciate the time and the ability to be able to sell our story and get it out there, because we are worried about environmental issues, wetlands, all those kind of things. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to voice our concerns and what we're trying to do to protect it all.
Of course, and congratulations to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, that wraps up our interviews of this year's National Wetlands Awardees. But I hope hearing from this year's award winners sparked some reflection on what a thriving future for wetlands means to you. To me, it's a reminder that a thriving future isn't just an idea. It's something that people are building every day with creativity, care, and love for these places. The work that our awardees doing shows what's possible. Thank you for listening and for celebrating their impact with us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to People, Places, Planet, the official podcast of the Environmental Law Institute. Our work wouldn't be possible without the support of people like you. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, attend one of our events, or support our work financially, head to eli.org.